Ezina, a 14-year-old girl from the small town of Ifit, found herself in a situation she never imagined. Despite repeated warnings from her parents, she had been secretly meeting her boyfriend. Her father's stern words rang in her mind. "You're too young to have a boyfriend. Focus on your studies and leave boys alone for now." But Ezina, driven by curiosity and what she believed was love, continued to disobey. She would sneak out whenever she could, making excuses about studying at a friend's house or running errands. One day, after feeling unwell for weeks, Ezin realized she was pregnant. Her heart pounded as she approached her boyfriend, Emeka, with the news. I think I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emeka's face turned pale. "What? No, that's not possible. It can't be mine," he said, taking a step back. "But you're the only one I've been with," Ezine pleaded, her voice cracking. "I don't care. I'm not ready for this." "Don't tell anyone it's mine," Emeka said coldly before walking away, leaving Ezine alone and terrified. For weeks, Ezine struggled to keep her secret. She wore loose clothes and tried to act normal, but the fear of being discovered consumed her. Every morning, she woke up dreading the moment her parents would find out. One night, as she lay in bed, she overheard her parents talking in the living room. "I'm worried about Ezine," her mother Chiamaka said. "She's been acting strange lately." "Maybe she's finally taking her studies seriously," her father Okeke replied. "It's about time she listened to us about focusing on her future." Ezine felt a wave of guilt. She knew her parents had high hopes for her, and now she had let them down in the worst way possible. The fear of disappointing her parents, coupled with the terror of becoming a mother at such a young age, overwhelmed her. She imagined the beating she might receive, the shame she would bring to her family, and the possibility of being kicked out of her home. "What am I going to do?" she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. For days, Ezine wrestled with her options. She considered telling her parents, hoping they might understand, but every time she tried to bring it up, her courage failed her. One afternoon, as she walked home from school, she passed by the bus station. She stopped, staring at the buses lined up, ready to take people to far-off places. An idea began to form in her mind. That night, Ezine lay awake, her mind racing. "I can't stay here," she thought. "I can't face them. I can't face anyone." The next morning, after her parents left for work, Ezine made her decision. With shaking hands, she packed a small bag with some clothes and the little money she had saved. As she stood in her room, one last time, she looked around at the familiar surroundings. Her school books on the desk, photos of her friends on the wall, the teddy bear she'd had since childhood sitting on her bed. Everything reminded her of the life she was about to leave behind. Ezina scribbled a quick note. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please don't look for me." She left it on her bed, hoping it would buy her some time before they started searching. With a heavy heart, she slipped out of the house. As she walked towards the bus station, every step felt like lead. She kept looking over her shoulder, afraid someone might recognize her and stop her. At the bus station, Ezine approached the ticket counter, her voice trembling as she spoke to the attendant. "One ticket, please. To wherever the next bus is going." The attendant looked at her curiously but didn't ask any questions. "Next bus is to Lagos. Leaves in 10 minutes. Ezine nodded, handing over most of her money for the ticket. As she waited for the bus, she thought about her parents coming home to find her gone. She imagined their worry, their anger, their disappointment. But in her mind, this was the only way. As the bus pulled up, Ezine took one last look at the town she had called home for 14 years. Tears welled up in her eyes as she boarded, knowing she was leaving behind everything and everyone she knew. The bus lurched forward, and Ezine watched through the window as Ifit faded into the distance. She placed a hand on her stomach, feeling the weight of her decision and the uncertainty of her future. "I'm sorry," she whispered. To her parents, to her unborn child, and to herself. After several hours of driving, the bus finally came to a stop at a bustling park in Lagos. Ezine stepped off the bus, her legs wobbly from the long journey. She stared wide-eyed at her new surroundings, overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, and the towering buildings. This was nothing like her small town in Ifite. "Where am I supposed to go now?" Ezine muttered to herself, clutching her small bag tightly. She had spent her last naira on the bus ticket, leaving her with no money and no idea where to go. The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was alone, pregnant, and lost in a big city she knew nothing about. As the sun began to set, Ekene wandered the streets of Lagos. Her stomach growled with hunger, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since morning. She passed by food vendors, the aroma of their wares making her mouth water, but she had no money to buy anything. "Excuse me," she tried asking a passerby, "do you know where I can find a cheap place to stay?" The person barely glanced at her before hurrying away, leaving Ekene feeling even more alone. As darkness fell, Ekene's fear grew. She had nowhere to sleep, and the streets were becoming more intimidating by the minute. She kept walking, her feet aching, hoping to find somewhere safe to rest. In a quieter part of the city, Ekene spotted an elderly woman locking up what looked like a small shop. Desperate for help, she approached the woman. "Good evening, ma," Ekene said, her voice trembling. "Please, I'm new in this place and I'm lost. I can't find my way. Could you please let me sleep at your house until tomorrow? Please help me." The elderly woman looked at Ekene with surprise and suspicion. "What do you mean you're lost? What are you doing on the street at this time of night? Where are your parents?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern and a hint of accusation. Ekene, feeling cornered and desperate, decided to tell the truth. I ran away from home," she admitted, her eyes welling up with tears. "I'm pregnant, and I was scared to tell my parents. I have nowhere to go." The woman's expression changed from surprise to disappointment. "As young as you are, you're already pregnant. You must be a very stubborn girl," she said, shaking her head. "Now go away from me, I can't help you." Ekene felt her heart sink. She had hoped the woman would take pity on her, but instead she found herself being chased away once again. With tears streaming down her face, she walked away, feeling more alone than ever. As she continued her aimless wandering, exhaustion began to take over. Ekene found a large tree in a quiet area and sat down, leaning against its trunk. Her eyelids felt heavy, and she was just about to drift off when she heard footsteps approaching. Ekene's eyes snapped open, and she saw a group of young men walking toward her. Their loud voices and aggressive body language made her heart race with fear. Without thinking, she jumped to her feet and started running. "Hey, where are you going?" one of the boys shouted, and to Ekene's horror, she heard them start to chase her. Her pregnant body protested as she ran as fast as she could, her breath coming in short gasps. "Please, God, help me," she prayed silently as she darted down unfamiliar streets, trying to lose her pursuers. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Ekene could no longer hear the boys behind her. She slowed down, her lungs burning and her legs shaking. She found herself in a quiet, partially developed area of the city. As she caught her breath, Ekene's thoughts turned to her family back in Ifita. She imagined her mother discovering her empty room, the note she had left. She could almost hear her father's angry voice, her mother's sobs. The guilt and homesickness washed over her. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry, Papa," she whispered into the night, tears falling freely now. As she walked through the quiet area, Ekene spotted an unfinished building. It was just a concrete shell with no windows or doors, but it offered some shelter from the elements and prying eyes. Cautiously, she approached the structure. "Hello?" she called out softly, making sure no one else was using it as a shelter. When she received no response, she stepped inside. The floor was hard and dusty, but to Ekene's exhausted body, it felt like a luxury. She found a corner that was partially hidden from view of the entrance and settled down, using her small bag as a pillow. As she lay there, trying to get comfortable, Ekene placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling the faint movements of the life inside her. A fresh wave of emotion washed over her. She was terrified, but she knew she couldn't give up. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for the child she was carrying. The next morning, Ekene woke up to the sound of construction workers arriving at the site. Panicking, she quickly gathered her things and slipped out before they could notice her. She wandered the streets again, her stomach growling with hunger, her mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. As she walked, she passed by a small church. The doors were open, and she could hear the faint sound of singing coming from inside. Drawn by a sense of desperation and hope, Ekene entered the church. Inside, the congregation was singing a hymn, their voices filling the small space with warmth and comfort. Ekene stood at the back, unsure of what to do, but something about the atmosphere made her feel a bit more at ease. She quietly found a seat in the last pew and bowed her head, tears streaming down her face as she prayed for guidance and strength. After the service, as people began to leave, the priest approached her. He was an older man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "My child, are you all right?" he asked, noticing her tear-streaked face and the weariness in her eyes. Ekene hesitated for a moment, but something about the priest's demeanor made her feel safe. She decided to confide in him. I'm not all right, Father," she began, her voice shaking. "I'm pregnant and I ran away from home. I have nowhere to go and I don't know what to do." The priest listened intently, nodding as Ekene poured out her heart. When she finished, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You've been through a lot, my dear," he said gently, "but running away won't solve your problems. You need to face them and you need support. You're not alone in this." Ekene looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But what if they don't want me back? What if they hate me for what I've done?" The priest shook his head. "Your parents love you, Ekene. They may be disappointed, but they won't stop loving you. You need to give them a chance to help you. And if you can't go back home right away, there are people who can support you here." He offered her a place to stay at the church's shelter, where she could receive food, rest, and counseling. Ekene felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't the solution to all her problems, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Ekene stayed at the shelter, receiving care and guidance from the church community. She met other young women who had been through similar situations, and their stories gave her strength. Slowly, she began to rebuild her confidence and come to terms with her situation. One day, after much contemplation, Ekene decided it was time to contact her parents. With the help of the priest, she wrote a heartfelt letter, explaining everything that had happened and expressing her deep regret for running away. She sent the letter, not knowing how they would respond, but hoping for the best. A few days later, Ekene was sitting in the church when the priest approached her with a smile. "Ekene, I have some good news," he said, holding out a letter. "Your parents have replied." With trembling hands, Ekene took the letter and opened it. As she read her mother's words, tears filled her eyes. "My dear Ekene, we have been so worried about you. We were devastated when we found your note, but we never stopped loving you. Please come home. We will get through this together as a family. Your father and I are not angry with you. We just want you to be safe. Come back to us, and we will support you and your child. Love, Mama." Ekene's heart swelled with emotion. She had feared the worst, but now she knew she had a home to return to, a family who loved her despite everything. With the help of the priest, Ekene made arrangements to return to Ifite. The journey back was filled with mixed emotions, nervousness, relief, and a sense of hope for the future. As the bus pulled into her hometown, Ekene's heart raced. She had left in fear and shame, but now she was returning with a renewed sense of courage. When the bus arrived, Ekene stepped off, her eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. She spotted her parents waiting for her, their faces a mix of worry and relief. As soon as they saw her, they rushed forward, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry," Ekene sobbed, clinging to her mother. "I was so scared." Her mother held her close, stroking her hair. "Shh, it's all right, my dear. You're home now. We're here for you." Her father, who had always been the more stern and stoic of the two, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this together, Ekene. You're not alone." Ekene felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt safe. She knew there would be challenges ahead, but she also knew she had the support of her family. As they walked home together, Ekene felt a sense of peace. She had made mistakes, but she had also found the strength to face them. And with her family's love and support, she knew she could overcome anything. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led her back to where she belonged, with the people who loved her, ready to face the future with hope and determination. Ekene's return home marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She and her parents spent many long nights talking, rebuilding their trust and understanding. There were moments of tension and tears, but also moments of laughter and joy as they grew closer than ever before. Her mother Nkechi became her greatest source of strength. Together, they navigated the challenges of pregnancy, attending prenatal appointments and preparing for the baby's arrival.